I'm Rahul. Really excited that you all want to spend an hour with me this evening. Thanks for joining. What I want to talk about is Android versus iOS. And I think probably everyone on the call knows what Android and iOS are. They are the dominant mobile operating systems of the day. But what I think doesn't get talked about enough is how wildly different the approaches to Android and iOS are. How different the approaches to mobile operating systems are for Android and iOS. Google and Apple, the two companies behind these two platforms, have very, very different mentalities and values when it comes to developing products. And I think that's something that, if you look historically at technology, it's just so interesting that these two companies, which have so wildly different values, both are so successful. And I think that's what will also be educational for future platforms. So we'll spend today talking about that and thinking about how that might affect jobs in the future and like what we might end up working on in coming generations of technology. Yeah, so like Brian mentioned, I'm a Android developer actually at Facebook. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart because I every single day I work on developing Android apps, either at Facebook, which is where I work full time, or at Stanford, I actually teach about Android development. And so just kind of understanding this topic is something I find really personally interesting as well. So in terms of what I want to cover, I'll start with what is a platform. In terms of a business model, like what does a platform mean in terms of having a defensible business model? Then we'll talk about a brief history of Android and iOS. And then the actual main topic is around how different the approaches are, how opposite the approaches are for Android and iOS, and then what that might mean going forward. So what is a platform? So the way I like to think about it is that a platform really is about bringing together consumers and producers. So I'm representing consumers here as this purple or this pink bubble. And on the other hand, we have producers. And producers are these light blue bubbles. And the reason I make producers a little bit larger in terms of size is because typically there's a lot more consumers than there are producers. The way you can think about this is, for example, if you have an iPhone, then you're going to be a consumer of apps on the iPhone. And then the producers will be the actual app developers. So for example, you have like Airbnb or Uber or Instacart or any number of other apps. Those are all producers. And then as someone who's downloading the app, I'm the consumer. And so the platform is that thing in the middle. It's the intermediary between which producers are able to transact with consumers. That is the fundamental value of the platform. It brings together consumers and producers. But more than that, it actually adds value. The platform has to add value in order to be a successful platform. And I'm enumerating those values as innovation, guidelines, and functionality. So going back to the iPhone example, Apple, which is a company that developed the iPhone, they provide a lot of innovation in the iPhone, right? So when the iPhone came out in 2007, it was immediately regarded as one of the technological marvels of the time. And actually the iPhone year over year continues to provide a huge amount of innovation, right? It's kind of mind-boggling how in such a tiny package, they're able to fit a phone, a music player, and an internet browser. So back in 2007, the fact that you could fit all three of those things into one small package, which was actually affordable to many people, was insane. That was a huge amount of innovation that Apple provided through the original iPhone. The other value that the Apple platform provides is guidelines around what is and what isn't acceptable. So for example, if I have some app which for whatever reason might be illegal in a country, Apple will dictate what apps are allowed or not allowed in certain regions. Or if my app has obscene content, for example, Apple will take it down. So another big value of the platform is it has to be able to regulate what kind of content is allowed or is not allowed. And then finally, functionality. So Apple has a really big role in allowing other people to innovate as well. So for example, if I'm an app developer and I want to build an experience or build an application on the iOS platform, Apple will provide me an SDK or a software development kit so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel whenever I want to do something super common. So for example, almost every app today will show an image, right? Or maybe every app today will probably talk to the internet in order to get information, get data. And so the platform, either the Apple platform or the Android platform, they will provide functionality to make these common operations really quick and straightforward. Those are three big things that the platform does, in addition to being the intermediary between the consumer and producer. So if we think about examples, a really prominent example in the physical world, not the digital world, the physical world is Walmart, right? So Walmart is a huge platform. And the reason is because they have hundreds of stores, hundreds of Walmart stores all around the country. And there are millions and millions of people who visit a Walmart every single month, right? So they're the consumers, the people who are going in and buying, food or clothing or whatever else at Walmart. And on the other hand, you have the producers, who are the actual wholesalers or the manufacturers who are selling goods in Walmart. So you have a ton of consumers and a ton of producers, and they're transacting through Walmart. Walmart also provides innovation, right? They have a huge supply chain innovation. They have a whole fleet of trucks and people who manage all the complexity around that. That's innovation that Walmart's providing. Walmart has guidelines because they're dictating what kind of content they will allow, what kind of materials or goods that they'll sell through Walmart, and what they won't sell, right? They obviously have guidelines, and they have functionality, right? When I go into a Walmart, I have expectations around it has to be clean. I have to know where to find things. I need to get help if I need it, right? So they actually have the infrastructure in place to offer all that functionality. And then, of course, the other kind of prime example of a platform is mobile operating systems. So Android and iOS are probably two of the most successful platforms in the history of technology, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And the really amazing thing about platforms is that they are so important to the company because of a flywheel effect. What I mean by that is, let's say that I'm a developer for I'm an app developer, right? I want to basically build an app which provides some functionality, and I want people to download it. So today, I know that there are a ton of people who use the iPhone and a ton of people who use Android. And so if I have the option now to build an app, I'm going to pick one of those two platforms, right? So I don't know if people here are familiar, but back in the day, Windows also had a operating system. And I think they still do, actually, in some ways. But the number of people on the Windows operating system is tiny, right? I don't even know, there's probably a few thousand people who still have a Windows operating system phone. And so I'm obviously not going to build my app for Windows, right? Because I want to actually reach millions of people. I'm not going to be able to achieve that if I publish my app on Windows. And so because of the platform on iOS and Android, I'm going to publish my app on the iPhone probably, or Android. And what that will result in is if my mom or my dad is buying a new phone, they want to be able to buy a phone where they can have all these apps available. I want to be able to download things like Uber or Airbnb or all these popular apps, right? That will lead to more consumers. And so now the flywheel effect is complete. So now there are a lot more consumers on iPhone. So if I'm an app developer, I'm going to keep building more apps, and this cycle continues. So the idea being that if you are able to own a platform, that is immensely valuable for your business, because it's really hard to compete with a platform unless you have an existing set of consumers or producers. And that's actually very hard to do. And there's evidence of this actually playing out in the real world, right? So if you look at the most valuable companies in the world, here are the top 5 that I took from last week. So let's ignore number 2, because that's like, it's an oil company in Saudi Arabia, so it's not quite relevant to technology. But the other 4 companies out of the top 5, every single one of them is the owner of a dominant software platform or a hardware platform, right? Apple owns the iPhone, which is a huge, probably the most successful platform in the history. Microsoft owns the Windows operating system, which is a dominant OS for almost every PC out there, right? And Microsoft makes tons and tons of money through people selling software through Windows. Amazon, obviously, the actual Amazon.com website is a huge platform, right? Like you have literally millions and millions of people visiting the site every single day who are buying from hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of people who are selling products. And also AWS. So AWS is Amazon Web Services. That is also a huge platform where developers can use different services in order to build their websites. And then consumers, which are people like you and me, regular people, they're able to use these websites that are powered on AWS. And then finally, Google, which owns Android. And in fact, you could also argue that things like Google Maps or Gmail, these are also good examples of platforms that Google owns. So you can kind of tell the pattern here that if you own a platform which is used by hundreds of millions or billions of people, you have something which very, very few companies in the world have, and you'll be able to extract a lot of value from that. So real quick, I'd like to get a sense for the room. If you have an iPhone, if you use an iPhone as your primary phone, like your primary device, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, looks like most people, I would say. So I'm assuming the rest of you, like the other 3 of you, probably are on the Android side. So I think that kind of lines up with my experience too. Like most people in the Bay Area or in the US are iOS first. Like the US is one of the few countries in the world which are iOS dominant. Most other countries in the world are Android dominant. But yeah, just kind of wanted to get a sense of, where are people coming from. So let's talk about the history of Android and iOS and how we came to be at this current state of the world where, most countries, most people in the world actually have an Android, but there are a couple countries like the US or Japan, which have mostly iOS. So really quick, going back way further back in time, if you look at the 1950s and 1960s, the idea of a computer was this huge, gargantuan thing, which it would have been unthinkable to actually have that in your home. Like the idea of personal computing didn't exist. The only computers were used by governments or really huge scientific labs to do some sort of computation. But then as you moved forward in time, like in the 1970s, you had Apple actually. This is like the old version of Apple. They were actually quite innovative in actually being able to package up all the core components of a computer and putting that into something which actually fit onto your desk. That's like the Macintosh was really famous back in the day for how small and innovative it was to fit everything. And then if you keep going, in the 1990s, you had actual personal computers. Growing up, this is how I interacted with a computer. You had this big kind of desktop block, which is sat underneath your desk or on top of your desk, and you had this really big, clunky computer with a monitor and a keyboard. But you can kind of see the pattern here, right? Like you start out with something huge, and then computers, decade after decade, became smaller and smaller. And eventually became, to the 2000s, in the early 2000s, you had the very first kind of popular laptops. And a laptop was kind of mind-blowing because you could actually put it into your backpack and like go to the office or go to school with this thing, which actually you could take anywhere. And so once we had that, the next logical step was, okay, what if we take this one step further and actually have a computer which fits in your pocket? So it was no secret, right? Like everyone knew that the next logical step of this was having a computer that fit in your pocket and could have all the functionality of a laptop, but in a smaller form factor. And that is where we got, in 2007, the very first version of the iPhone. And this is a really famous moment in technology, actually. There's a bunch of articles written about it, how in 2007, Steve Jobs went on stage and he basically told people that for the first time ever, we're going to have a device which plays your music, you can go to the internet, and you can call people all in one device. And that was like such a big deal. And then shortly after the iPhone came out, the Android operating system also started taking off, and they had a bunch of different partners who manufactured Android phones as well. And so what's really interesting is 2007 is when the iPhone came out. What I have linked here, I can share slides afterward if people are interested. But it's really interesting because, like I talked about, there was no secret that the next logical step in computing would be a phone that fits in your pocket and you could call people with. And so Google was developing a phone computer since 2005. And then famously, what happened is in '07, when Steve Jobs went on stage and announced the iPhone, it was way beyond the expectation that anyone in the industry had. Like, it was so amazing that basically what happened is Google scrapped their plans for their own phone and basically rebuilt their whole user interface and the whole design pattern in that 1 year. And that's why Android came out 1 year later. Google was working on this kind of mobile operating system, but the iPhone was just so much beyond what they expected. It was just so good that they were delayed by a year. And so every year since then, since '07 and '08, every year Android and iPhone have had one major version release. So like in 2014, we had Android 5.0 and the iPhone 6. And then last year, 2020, we had Android 11 come out and the iPhone 12. So every year there's been kind of a major step function in terms of new functionality, new designs, new hardware that comes out for both platforms. And the thing that's especially powerful about this platform compared to earlier platforms like the laptop is that there are so many more mobile phones or smartphones out there in the world compared to any other form factor, right? So if you think about the 1950s and 1960s, the number of computers that, those huge computers that took up a whole room, you probably had, I don't know, maybe hundreds of them in the whole country, right? There were a very, very small number of them available. When you got to like the Macintosh era, they were still very much kind of a hobbyist thing, right? A normal person back in the day wouldn't have actually had a Macintosh. Then with 1990s, that was really when you started to see most households in the US at least have a computer. And then laptops are now kind of, most students have them. And the next step is the smartphone, which is like most people in the world have a smartphone. And this graph demonstrates that. In 2012, which is actually 5 years after the iPhone came out, there were already more than 1 billion people who had a smartphone. And then the thing that's kind of mind-boggling is every year since 2012, there's been a huge increase in the number of people who actually own an Android phone or an iPhone. So as of 2021, the expectation is that almost 4 billion people will have one, which is more than half the people in the world will have a smartphone. Right, so that it's kind of, you can kind of immediately see that if you are the owner of a platform which makes these smartphones, you are going to be enormously wealthy and enormously powerful, because you actually influence how billions of people use this technology every single day. And I really do mean every single day, right? Smartphones are unprecedented in the breadth and depth of usage, right? Smartphones are such a personal and intimate device. There was a study done which said that your smartphone is with you for 22 hours a day, right? Like, there's only 2 hours in the day, probably when you're showering maybe, right? Or like when you're in the bathroom, hopefully, that you're not actually using a smartphone. And the average person will check their smartphone 63 times a day, right? So like the amount of time people spend with a smartphone and also how often you're using your smartphone is, again, something which has never been seen before in technology. And also, the other really exciting thing about smartphones is that they have a huge amount of hardware capability built into the device, right? So for most people in the world, they will never buy a dedicated camera. Like, my dad, back in the day, he would actually buy like a $500 or $1,000 camera or a video camcorder and like record me growing up, right? I'm sure maybe similarly for some of you. That probably will never happen again unless you're like a camera buff or a video, like a camcorder buff, right? Now, everyone has a camera built into their phone. Same thing with location, right? Because you're with your phone 22 hours a day, if you go to work, you go to school, you're going to get coffee, your phone will now record where have you been exactly within 10 meters or so, right? And then same thing, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, being able to download different websites or images using mobile data. All of that is kind of, it just unlocks so much functionality that people in past generations could never have dreamed of. So any questions at this point about kind of what we've talked about so far? Like, what is a platform in the sense of a business model and why it's so important? And also the history of Android and iOS? No? Okay, so then what I want to talk about next is the actual Android and iOS and how different the approaches are to developing these platforms. So if you kind of look at it side by side, Android is owned by Google, and Apple, the iPhone is owned by Apple, right? And like I showed you before, these are probably two of the most important and certainly two of the richest companies in the world. And what I find so interesting is that Google and Apple, in terms of culture and in terms of how they approach product development, really are quite different. So on one hand, think about how does Google make money? Google makes money primarily through advertising. So for example, all of us are probably using Google search multiple times a day to find information about the things happening around us, to find out the news, to find out, how to get to Stack Overflow. You ask a programming question, you go to Google, and it'll lead you to whatever has the most relevant answer, right? So the way Google makes money is because we are so deeply engaged with these free services like Google Search, Gmail, Google Maps, and Google will sell advertising on top of those, right? So it really it's printing money because Google has us hooked on these services, and then once we are using anything 100 times a day or 50 times a day, then it's so easy to kind of put an ad there and charge money to the business for those eyeballs that you control. On the other hand, Apple primarily makes money through selling products, right? The entire idea of Apple is that they're a premium, high-end brand. Their marketing is insane. Apple marketing is probably one of the best in the world. So they have this idea or this notion that we sell really high quality products, and because of that, we're going to charge you a really, really high premium. So Apple products are always going to be more expensive than Google products because Google actually, most of the products are free, right? Like you literally don't pay anything. The hardware that Google does sell, or like the hardware that Android operating system runs on, is actually produced by partners. So the way this works is that the Android operating system is actually free. And companies like HTC or Samsung or Huawei, they will develop phones based on the Android OS. That's in contrast with Apple, because Apple will have a fully integrated software and hardware experience, right? They don't do any outsourcing of the development. Everything is done in-house. And there's a lot to be said about the different approaches here. On one hand, if you have hardware developed by partners, you actually could argue that there's more room for innovation, right? Because Samsung, for example, could try out some really experimental, wild approach to developing foldable phones or, whatever else might be the new hot thing. And Google doesn't care, right? Like Google says, try it out. If it sells and it does well, then that's great. And that could lead the industry and shift the mindset toward how people want to buy phones in the future. And if it doesn't work out, then that sucks for you, right? So Google kind of is agnostic to what hardware partners are doing. On the other hand, Apple is in full control of what the hardware and software looks like together, which means that there's only one player here. So potentially there's less room for experimentation, there's less room to try things out because there's only one person making the decision or one company making the decision. But the benefit is that now you have a really well put together final product. Because if you think about, I don't know if people here are familiar with APIs, right? An API is an application programming interface, which is basically a way to describe how should different components interact. And so typically what Google will do is it will say that, okay, here is the API for Android. If you want to build an Android compliant phone, you need to match up with this API. So as long as you match up with the API, you can do whatever you want. But when things meet at the boundary at these APIs, that's where things, you will find that sometimes there's a rough edge there, right? Things don't always operate just the way you had planned because there's some miscommunication or there's some ill-defined interface. And that you actually do see that quite a bit with Android phones, where there's some Android developers or some Android phones which just don't feel correct. Like the material is shoddy or the experience there's a lot of bloatware or spamware on Android phones. On the other hand, because Apple owns everything, they can make sure that the end experience to the user is amazing. And I think that kind of most of you would probably agree, right? Apple just creates amazing products. So that's one of the trade-offs that you get with whether the hardware is produced by partners or by you. With Android, going along with this idea of the hardware being produced by partners, what Google has done with Android, which is so novel, so interesting, is that the actual Android operating system is open source. So what that means is that the actual source code is completely free for everyone to look at. I could literally go to the Android website and download all the source code and build my own competing phone, and Google just wouldn't care. I mean, I have to be compliant with kind of the Google, the spec for how to build an Android phone, but as long as I do that, I can do whatever I want. On the other hand, the iPhone operating system, iOS, is developed completely in secret. And I actually do mean secret. Like even people who work at Apple don't know what will come out in the next version of iOS. So it really is the exact opposite. Android is developed completely out in the open, in the wild, and the iPhone is developed completely in secret. And this is a really good example of what I'm talking about when I say opposite approaches, right? So for Google, going back to the first point, the way they make money is by selling advertising on top of free apps or services. And so if you think about the calculus that Google is doing, what they're saying is that we are going to allocate hundreds of millions of dollars to keep developing Android, but all of that money is going to be out in the open for free, right? There's no business, there's no actual profit they're making from Android. So the reason they're doing all that is they're saying that, okay, if we can make Android really, really great, then that will bring tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people to buy an Android phone, and they will actually start using Google products. So basically for Google, the appeal of having Android and developing Android is that we can get more people online. The more people who come online, the more people will start using Google services, and the more money we'll make. On the other hand, Apple doesn't care about how many people come online. They care about developing really great products and having really high margins. So instead of having billions of people come online, they only really care about the kind of the richest people in the world who are able to afford a premium product like Apple. And all their development is in secret, and they just come out every year with a brand new product, and it sells really well, and they make tons of money. Right? So it's very, very different approaches here. And then going along with that, Google really does try and foster a much more open ecosystem, whereas Apple has a really, really tight control over the user experience and the apps that are developed. So with Google, like you have, the Play Store, which is the primary way that people are able to develop apps or find apps. But you actually have many other platforms. So Samsung has their own app store, and you can publish apps there. There are many open source app stores on Google where you can actually download whatever other kind of content you want, even if it's not sanctioned by Google. So it's just way more open. It's kind of the hacker mentality where you can kind of go in and do whatever you want. On the other hand, Apple has a really, really tight control over the user experience. If they're not happy with you as a developer, or if they think that you're doing something shady, they will immediately ban you. Right? So Apple is much more kind of draconian in their enforcement and making sure that anything which is not up to their quality standard doesn't actually impact the end user. Whereas Google is much more kind of lackadaisical about how they approach enforcement. So I think this diagram describes it really well. I stole this from someone named Ben Thompson, who's actually a really smart and well-known author about, he kind of just talks about technology and the state of innovation in technology. So like at the top of the pyramid, you have things that are used very, very frequently. And like it's kind of what we interact with as a user, right? Like Google search or, Facebook or Uber. Like these are services that live on top of apps. And at the bottom of the pyramid, we actually have the hardware, which is powering all of that, right? So you actually have a hardware device, a phone. And on top of that, you have many different types of software, many different apps, many different services. And so if you think about how Google thinks about the world, Google cares about the top of the pyramid. They want deep engagement on many different services and apps that they've developed. On the other hand, Apple cares much more about the bottom of the pyramid. They care about hardware, and they do have a lot of software they've written for the iPhone, but primarily the way they're able to make such huge profits is because they sell really good hardware and they control the interface between the hardware and the software. So like this diagram, I think, is a really good demonstration of how these companies think about the world in very different directions. And just let me illustrate this by talking about the developer experience. So I'm a Android developer, and honestly, one of the reasons I became an Android developer is because of how Google and Apple, the difference between how they viewed the publishing process for an app. So it's just, in general, it's just way easier to publish an app on Google Play than it is to publish an app on the App Store for iPhone. So with Google Play, it's a cheap one-time $25 fee. Once you pay that $25 fee, you can now publish however many apps you want for the rest of your time as a developer. On the other hand, developing for Apple is actually really expensive. There's an annual $99 fee that you have to keep paying for as long as you're a developer. When you actually submit an app, it's actually very easy for Google Play. Within 2 or 3 days, you will get typically an answer about whether your app is accepted or rejected. And most of that process is actually automated. There's no human, unless in certain circumstances there might be if there's something questionable. But in most circumstances, the entire app review process is done by a machine. So it's way faster and way easier for Google to do that. On the other hand, Apple will force you to take, it might take anywhere between a week or 2 weeks to actually do a review, and it's actually done by a human. So there's actually some person sitting somewhere in the world who's downloading your app and trying it out. And if they're not happy with your app for whatever reason, they'll reject it, which is a very frustrating and slow process. So in general, the result of these two things means that on the App Store, you have way fewer apps, but the apps that you do have are typically much higher quality. On the other hand, with Google, you'll have way more app diversity, you'll have way more apps that are published, and you'll have faster iteration speed. So once you publish an app, it's very easy for me to submit an update and have that be live for everyone within a day or two. Whereas submitting an update for the App Store is a way more painful process, and it could get rejected at any time. And so in general, with Google, you'll have a lower app quality in general. If you take an average app from Google Play, I think it's not controversial to say that the app quality is going to be lower compared to Apple, but you do have way fewer apps in the App Store. And so I'm not saying that one of these approaches is correct or not correct, but there is a trade-off, right? Google values a broader ecosystem, more people participating in that ecosystem, even if the average quality is less. Whereas Apple cares much more about higher quality, even if that means less innovation from the developer perspective, fewer apps and less developers participating. Cool. So then wrapping up, what I want to talk about, which I think is really, really interesting, is what is the impact of these different approaches to our careers as developers? I'm sure many people here probably are planning on being software engineers, right? And so like this has a really tangible impact on how we think about where will the jobs be, how will we think about innovation, what companies will actually benefit from these different approaches, right? So I wanted to have at least one Kamala GIF in here. So the reason why you should care is that, it's interesting to look at the history of what has happened with these technology platforms, but we're going to be participating in these platforms. I mean, we already do participate, right? Like the fact that everyone here has an iPhone or a couple of you have an Android means that you are actively taking part in these huge platforms that I talked about. And in the future, we're going to be developing these platforms, right? We're going to be the ones changing and improving and giving feedback on these platforms. So the first thing is that these platforms have a huge impact on our lives. So that's an obvious reason why you should care. Second is that there's so many jobs available to all of us as an app developer, right? So if you want to develop an Android app or an iPhone app, there are so many opportunities here because, like the web has been around for a long time. But this idea of having mobile apps is actually relatively new compared to at least, the web, which has been around since the 90s. So there is a lot of opportunity here. If you are interested in becoming an app developer, there are so many companies that are really desperately looking for talented people. And if you're not interested in becoming an app developer, there are still a bunch of opportunities available to you if you actually want to work at the platform companies. So what I mean by that is if you actually want to work at Apple or Google, there are hundreds or thousands of jobs available at the platform to develop the platform, right? So Google is hiring. I know a bunch of friends who are at Google and a couple of friends at Apple who are actually helping to build the next version of Android or iOS. And the third reason is that even if you're not that interested in mobile, right? You don't really care about smartphones. Whatever happens here, however the story shapes up with mobile platforms, that will likely shape future platforms. So whether that's wearable technology or AR, VR, or whatever other platforms exist in the future, whatever happens with Android and iOS will probably influence how those other platforms end up looking like. And this is actually very personal to me because the reason I have my job actually is because of the different mentality that Android has versus iOS, right? So we talked about this a little bit, but because Android is a way more open ecosystem, you have different things like Android TV, Android Auto, Wear OS, and Facebook Portal. Like all of these products are based on the Android OS, and they've been created by either Google themselves or partners who have taken Android and modified it in a certain way. So the reason it's relevant to me is because I work at Facebook and I work on a product called Portal. And the Facebook Portal actually has an operating system which is a fork of Android OS. So you take the open source project for Android, we downloaded it, we modified it, and that is actually what's powering our hardware. So in many ways, the reason I have my job now is because of this more open ecosystem that Android has fostered. And so, I mean, going back again to the very beginning, the reason I find this whole area so fascinating is because there's so many questions that I don't know the answer to, and it'll be so interesting to see how the technology platforms will actually evolve over time. So like an obvious question you might ask is, within the mobile world, right now we have Android and iOS. Will those two platforms continue to be the dominant platforms going forward? Or is there actually an opportunity for a third platform? So for example, back in the day, like 10 years ago, there was the Windows mobile operating system. And that pretty much died out, right? Because these platforms have a flywheel effect where more consumers will bring on more producers and more producers will bring on more consumers, it's actually very hard to imagine for me if a third person or third company can actually compete with Android and iOS. It's just so, it's essentially like an oligopoly where Android and iOS are dominant. It's very hard for a third participant to emerge unless there is some huge innovation, right? Let's say that some company somewhere in the world comes out with a brand new form factor of a different kind of phone, which is protected by a patent or by some technology that only they have. That could be a really interesting way for another person to enter into the arena and actually compete. But right now, it just seems so hard for a third company to enter. Another really interesting question is, will companies continue to develop separate Android and iOS apps? So what's really interesting is that when we had the internet, there was a common language for developing web pages, right? You wrote some HTML, you wrote some CSS and JavaScript, and for the most part, whether you used Firefox or Chrome or Internet Explorer, your website mostly just worked. With the emergence of these mobile operating systems in 2007, 2008, we started to write custom apps for Android and iOS. And that was actually a really big change in how we delivered technology to the end user. Because now, if I'm Uber, or if I'm Airbnb, or if I'm some other company, I now have to write a separate application for the Android OS and the iOS, right? So Android apps are typically developed in Java or Kotlin. iOS apps are typically developed in Objective-C or Swift. And so really, like, if you want to develop an app and reach everyone, you have to do almost double the work because you have to write the same app in 2 platforms. So there is a question here of going forward, this feels broken, right? Like, why do I have to do the same amount of work to reach everyone when really the experience I'm delivering to the end user is identical, right? So it's kind of a broken system. So can there be a technology like React Native or Flutter, or maybe something else that comes up in the future, which can solve this problem of you write it once and it actually works everywhere? And then finally, there's also a really interesting question of, will mobile even be a consequential platform? In 10 years or 20 years from now, will mobile operating systems be where we spend our time? Right? So if you think about it, you have a lot of exciting technology being developed around AR and VR. Like, you have these headsets that are like Oculus, for example, or there are rumors about Apple developing some glasses that might, like some augmented reality glasses. And you also have wearable technology. For example, you have like the Apple Watch, or you have the Android Wear. And you could also imagine other things in the future, right? Like, this might sound like science fiction, but I wouldn't be surprised if 10 or 20 years from now, we have things that are implanted into your body somewhere. Like an actual computer which is implanted into your body, right? And so as technology becomes more and more ubiquitous and becomes smaller, we're going to become more and more integrated with it. And so it might be the case that Apple and Google, unless they develop the next big platform, the importance of Apple and Android, of iPhone and Android, will actually diminish over time. So that's like another question to be had. And if Android and iOS do diminish in importance, what will the new important platform be, and who will be the winners of that platform? Those are all things that are kind of left to be seen. Cool. So that's all I had. I'd love to connect with you. I'm at rpandey1234 on Twitter, LinkedIn, and actually I run a pretty active YouTube channel. So I'm happy to answer any questions through any medium that you choose.